Margot Cleary had always been good at disappearing, not in the dramatic sense. No smoke, no mirrors, no vanishing act anyone would bother applauding. She disappeared the way plain furniture disappears into a room, the way background noise disappears into silence. She was 31 years old, 5'4", and wore cardigans in colors that matched the walls of whatever building she happened to be working in. She had learned early that smallness was a kind of armor. Not smallness of body, she'd never had that, but smallness of presence. Don't laugh too loud. Don't take up space at the lunch table. Don't let them see you looking. She was very, very good at looking without being seen. That was probably why Garrison Whitmore had hired her. He hadn't said it in those words, of course. The interview had been conducted in a glass-walled office on the 43rd floor of a building in downtown Vancouver, with a view of the mountains going purple in the late afternoon. The man across the desk had been polite, measured, and had asked her precisely 3 questions before sliding a contract across the table. The salary had made her go very still, not from excitement, from calculation. She'd done the math in 3 seconds flat. What it meant, what it bought, what it cost. She took the job. Her official title was Senior Financial Analyst. Her unofficial function, as she came to understand it over the first 6 weeks, was to not ask questions. The money she tracked moved in patterns she recognized from her graduate coursework in forensic accounting. Clean on the surface, meticulous even, but the flows beneath, the transfers between holding companies, the numbered accounts in Calgary and the Cayman Shelf entities, those told a different story. She understood, without anyone having to explain, that Whitmore Capital Group was not entirely a legitimate enterprise. She stayed anyway. She told herself it was the salary. She told herself it was the benefits, the pension, the view from her desk of the North Shore Mountains. She told herself a lot of things while she sat very quietly in her small office on the 38th floor and did her work better than anyone had ever done it before. What she did not tell herself, what she refused to examine too closely, was that she found it interesting. The patterns, the precision, the way money moved through the world like water through rock, finding every crack and fissure, always flowing toward the lowest point. She was very good at following it. She just never expected anyone to notice. Garrison Whitmore did not run the organization alone. This was something Margot had pieced together gradually, the way you piece together a puzzle when someone keeps removing pieces and hiding them under the table. She knew there were other men above him. She'd seen the name on certain wire authorizations, seen it once on a visitor's log she wasn't supposed to be looking at. Remy Castle. She'd never seen him. In 14 months at Whitmore Capital, she had not once encountered the man whose signature appeared on the documents that gave Garrison Whitmore actual authority. She knew his name the way you know the name of a weather system. Something large and distant that affects conditions on the ground without ever descending to street level. She knew he was 43. She knew he was from Montreal, originally, though he'd been in Vancouver for the past 8 years. She knew that 3 men who had crossed him were currently unaccounted for, in ways that required very creative paperwork. She did not know that he had been watching her work for 11 months. She found out on a Tuesday. It was the kind of Tuesday that had no warning. She'd come in early. She usually did, because she liked the office when it was empty, before the noise and the performance of other people's confidence filled the air. She had her coffee. She had her spreadsheets. She had her cardigan, a soft grey one she'd bought on sale, from a shop in since closed down. She was deep in a reconciliation report, tracking a discrepancies she'd found between 2 offshore accounts when the door opened. She didn't look up immediately. People opened her door sometimes. They usually left when they saw how boring she was. Mrs. Cleary. The voice was not Garrison's. It was not anyone she recognized. It was low and measured, and had the particular quality of a voice that did not raise itself because it had never needed to. She looked up. The man standing in her doorway was tall enough that the frame seemed to have been built with him in mind. Dark coat, dark suit beneath it. The kind of clothes that are expensive specifically because they don't announce themselves. Black hair, going silver at the temples. A face that had been handsome once and was now something more than handsome. Architecture, she thought, involuntarily. The kind of face that had been arranged by experience into something permanent. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read, which unsettled her more than she would have liked. "Mr. Whitmore isn't in yet," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I know," the man said. He stepped into the office. Behind him, 2 other men stayed in the hallway. She clocked them without meaning to, her brain cataloguing. Large, watchful hands visible, security, not Garrison's security. "I came to speak with you, with me, with you, Miss Cleary." She set down her pen. "About what?" He moved to the chair across from her desk, Garrison's chair, when he visited, though he rarely did, and sat in it without asking. He moved the way men move when they are used to every room belonging to them. "The Fairview account," he said. She felt her pulse shift, not spike, shift, like a gear changing. "That account is flagged for internal review. I know, you flagged it." He looked at her steadily. 3 weeks ago, before anyone else noticed the problem. "It's my job to notice problems." "It is," he agreed. "And you're very good at your job." He paused. Something moved behind his eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but attention. The focused kind. The kind that makes you feel like the only object in a very large room. "I'd like to understand how you found it," she told him. Not because she'd decided to trust him. She hadn't, not remotely. But because the question was specific and technical, and she was constitutionally incapable of leaving a good question unanswered. She walked him through the discrepancy, the reconciliation method she'd used, the pattern she'd identified across a 14-month dataset. She used precise language. She did not dumb it down. He listened without interrupting. That alone was unusual enough to note. When she finished, the silence in the room was different from the silence before she'd spoken. "You found that," he said, "in a dataset that 3 of my other analysts reviewed and cleared. They weren't looking in the right place." "Where were they looking?" "At the numbers they expected to find." She picked up her pen again, steadied herself. "I look at the spaces between." He was quiet for a moment. She didn't look at him. She looked at her spreadsheet, because that was safer, because his attention was the kind that made you want to squirm, and she refused to squirm. "I'm Remy Cassel," he said. She already knew. She kept her face very still. "Mrs. Cleary," she said, "I know who you are." The way he said it was odd, not threatening, something else. Something she filed away in the part of her brain reserved for things she didn't have time to examine right now. "Garrison speaks highly of you. Garrison barely knows I exist." "No," Remy Cassel agreed, and something in his voice shifted in a way she could not quite name. "He doesn't." He left 15 minutes later. She sat very still at her desk for a while after, and then she opened a new window on her computer and went back to work, because work was the thing she understood best, and right now she needed something she understood. She did not think about the way he had looked at her when he said that. She definitely did not think about it. 3 weeks passed. Margot moved through them the way she always moved through time, efficiently, quietly, without incident. She ate her lunch at her desk. She wore her cardigans. She found 2 more discrepancies in the Whitmore accounts and flagged them through proper channels. Because that was her job. Because she was very good at her job. And because being good at your job was the only reliable way she had ever found to take up space without apology. She did not see Remy Cassel again. She heard about him in the way you hear about weather systems. Garrison was on edge for a week after that Tuesday, which told her the visit had consequences she wasn't privy to. One of the senior partners disappeared from the Thursday morning meeting rotation and never came back, and no one mentioned him. The caliber of men who came and went from the executive floor changed slightly. Fewer soft-handed consultants, more of the watchful, large-shouldered variety. She noted all of it. She said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing. It was a Thursday evening in November when her quiet, carefully constructed invisibility stopped working. She had stayed late, again as usual, because there was a payroll reconciliation that wasn't sitting right, and she wanted another hour with it. The building was mostly empty. The cleaning crew had come and gone. Outside, Vancouver was doing the thing it does in November, which is rain with a conviction that borders on personal. She was reaching for her coat when she heard the voices. Not from the hallway, from the stairwell adjacent to her office. She wouldn't have noticed, normally, but she'd left the door cracked for the air, and the voices came through clearly, and one of them said her name. She went very still. "Cleary, woman. She's found everything. All of it." "Then she's a problem." "She's an employee. Garrison handles his own." "Garrison handles nothing. She's found the Rotterdam transfers. You understand what that means." A pause. Then, "What do you want to do?" She didn't hear the answer. Her heartbeat was suddenly very loud, filling the space where sound should have been. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door. Coat held against her chest, and breathed through her nose in slow, silent measures, the way her mother had taught her to do in the dentist's chair as a child. She knew the second voice. It belonged to a man named Clifford Haynes, who was officially Whitmore Capital's head of compliance, and who she had suspected for 8 months of being something much less official than that. She waited until the voices moved away, down the stairwell, not up, and then she waited another 3 minutes, counting her own heartbeat before she moved. She did not take the elevator. She took the service stairs at the far end of the building, the ones the cleaning crew used, and she came out into the underground parking garage with her keys in her hand, and her heart still doing that loud, unhelpful thing. She made it to her car. She sat in it. She told herself she was overreacting. She was not overreacting. She knew this because she was very good at looking at evidence, clearly. And the evidence said, Clifford Haynes had said she was a problem, and problems in this particular organization were not resolved through performance reviews. She drove home. She locked her door. She fed her cat, a large ginger tom named Biscuit, who had opinions about feeding schedules and expressed them loudly, and she sat on her kitchen floor with him in her lap and thought about what to do. She made a decision. She would do nothing. She would come in tomorrow, do her work, say nothing, be invisible. She was very good at invisible. She would disappear back into the wallpaper, and Clifford Haynes would reassess the risk level, and it would be fine. It was not fine. She made it to Friday afternoon before they took her. She had been walking to the parkade after work, the grey cardigan, the laptop bag, the keys in her hand, November rain doing its thing. The parkade was half empty at that hour, and she was thinking about the payroll reconciliation she hadn't finished, which meant she was not thinking about the black SUV that had been idling on the second level for longer than made sense. The arm came from behind, big and fast, and she didn't have time to do anything useful with the keys before something pressed against the side of her neck, and the fluorescent lights of the parkade went soft and blurry, and then simply stopped. She woke up in a chair, not zip-tied, not chained, just in a chair, in a room that smelled like concrete and damp wood, and something chemical she couldn't identify. Her head hurt precisely where the pressure had been. Her hands were cold. Biscuit was going to be furious about dinner. This was the thought that anchored her. Her cat was going to be furious. She focused on it while she took inventory. Wrists, fine. Ankles, fine. The chair was wooden, not bolted down. The room had 2 lights, industrial pendants, and 1 door with no visible lock on her side, which told her the door was being held from outside, rather than latched. 2 men stood near the far wall, not looking at her directly, which told her they were either bored or embarrassed, neither of which was reassuring. The door opened. Clifford Haynes walked in and looked at her the way men like him look at inconveniences, with the particular exhausted disdain of someone who has decided that a problem is beneath him, but cannot seem to make it go away. "Mrs. Cleary," he said, "you've put us in a difficult position." "I've been flagging discrepancies in the accounts," she said. "That's my job. Your job is to do what you're told." She looked at him. She kept her face very still. Then whoever hired me didn't explain the job properly. He didn't like that. She watched him not like it, the slight shift in his jaw, the way his eyes went flat. He was the kind of man who dressed menace in a suit and expected the suit to do the work. "The Rotterdam transfers," he said, "are fraudulent," she said, "by any reasonable reading of the documentation. They're private. Private and fraudulent aren't the same thing." He leaned toward her, and she made herself hold eye contact, which was harder than she'd expected, because her body was doing several panicked things she was trying not to acknowledge. "You're going to tell us what you've documented, what you've retained, what copies exist outside the system." "I don't retain personal copies," she said. "That would be a conflict of interest." Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile. "That's very principled of you. I have a principled employer." "You had a principled employer," Haynes corrected. And then he walked out, and the door closed, and she was alone with the two men who still weren't looking at her directly. She sat in the chair for 3 hours. She counted. She thought about the Rotterdam transfers, about what she'd documented, about what Haynes needed from her, and what she was actually willing to give. She thought about Biscuit. She thought, once, about Remy Castle's voice. Low, measured, the kind that doesn't raise itself, and then she put that thought away because it wasn't useful. At the 3-hour mark, the door opened again. Not Haynes this time. The man who entered was someone she'd never seen, and he looked at her with an expression that sat somewhere between professional and apprehensive, and then he took out a phone and held it toward her. "Someone wants to speak with you," he said. She looked at the phone. She took it. "Miss Cleary." The voice came through the speaker, and she felt something in her chest shift, the same gear change feeling from that Tuesday in her office, and she hated herself slightly for it. "Mr. Castle," she said. A pause. "Brief. Are you hurt?" She did inventory again. Headache. Cold hands. Badly in need of coffee. "No. Good." Another pause, and in it she heard something that might have been relief, very controlled, very brief. "Are Haynes' men in the room with you?" She looked at the two men near the wall. "Yes. Put the phone on speaker." She did. Remy Castle spoke 4 sentences in a voice that had no inflection and no warmth, and was possibly the most frightening thing she'd ever heard. She watched both men go completely still. One of them said, "Yes, sir," in the voice of someone who has just understood something profound about the nature of their situation. The other opened the door. "Someone will be there in 7 minutes," Remy Castle said, and his voice was back to the measured version, the one that was for her. "Stay in the chair. Don't try to move through the building on your own." "I wasn't going to," she said. "I know." And again, that strange note, that quality she couldn't name. "You're the smartest person in that building. You know better." She sat in the chair. She counted 6 minutes and 40 seconds before the door opened again, and 4 men came in who were not Haynes' men. She could tell by the way they moved, the way they looked at her. Not as an inconvenience, not as a variable, but as a specific person they had been sent to retrieve. "Messieurs Cleary," the first one said. "Mr. Castle sent us." "I gathered," she said, and stood up, and was grateful that her legs held. They drove for 40 minutes. She didn't ask where. She looked out the window at the rain-wet streets of Vancouver, resolving into the quieter streets north of the city. The kind of streets where the houses have gates and the gates have cameras, and she thought about Biscuit and the payroll reconciliation and what exactly she was walking into. The car stopped at a house that sat back from the road behind a line of Douglas firs, so tall they disappeared into the rain. Lights on inside, warm gold through the windows. She walked in behind one of the men and found herself in a wide hallway that smelled like wood and something that might have been cedar. And she registered involuntarily that someone who lived here had taste that was not about showing off. The art on the walls was quiet. The light fixtures were old. It looked like a home. She heard him before she saw him. "Leave us." The men left. She stood in the hallway, and Remy Cassel came down a half-flight of stairs into the light, and she saw, for the first time, what 3 hours in a concrete room did to the expression of a man who usually kept his face under very rigid control. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at her, just looked, for a moment that went on long enough that she became aware of her own face, her undone hair from where someone had grabbed it, the mark she could feel forming at the side of her neck. "You're limping," he said. "I twisted my ankle on the stairs. It's fine." "It's not fine." He moved toward her, and she went very still in the way she went still when something was happening that she didn't have a framework for yet. He stopped close enough that she could see the muscle working in his jaw, close enough that she understood, with a sudden clarity that was almost scientific, that what she'd been filing away in the not right now portion of her brain for 3 weeks was actually something very large, and had been there, unexamined, since a Tuesday morning when he'd asked her where she was looking. "Haynes," he said. "He wanted to know what copies I'd retained. Did you tell him? There are no copies." "I already told him that." She met his eyes. "There are no copies that he can access. That's a different thing." Something moved across his face, not the controlled, flat expression she'd catalogued. Something that broke through it. Something that looked, if she was being precise about it, like a man who has been holding himself very carefully together and has just run out of the particular kind of energy that requires. He reached out and touched the side of her jaw very lightly. Just his fingertips, turning her face slightly toward the light. She let him. "He did this," Remy said. "It wasn't a question. Not personally. He's the delegating type." His hand stayed. His thumb traced, once, the edge of the mark on her neck, and she was doing several things at once. Keeping very still, breathing carefully, being aware of every point of warmth that was his hand against her face, and being furious at herself for being aware of it. "Remy, don't tell me it's fine," he said. "Quiet. Don't." She looked at him. This close, she could see things she hadn't from across a desk. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the grey, threading more extensively through his hair than she'd noticed before. The way his expression, when it wasn't being controlled, looked like something that had been a long time without proper rest. "I need to go home," she said. "My cat hasn't been fed." He stared at her. Something shifted in his face that was possibly the beginning of a laugh, fought back with considerable effort. "Your cat. His name is Biscuit. He gets anxious. You're standing in my hallway with a bruise on your neck, and you're worried about your cat. Someone has to be." She held his gaze. "Are you going to do something about Clifford Haynes?" The question landed, and she watched it land, watched his expression close back down into that architecture of control, but different now, colder in a specific way, the way temperature drops in a room when a window opens somewhere. "Yes," he said. "Good." She looked down at her bag, which one of the men had retrieved and pressed on her before she left, laptop and all, blessedly intact. "Then I should go home, and tomorrow I'll come back to work and flag the Harlow account, because there's a pattern there I've been following for 6 weeks, and I'm fairly certain it connects to the Rotterdam problem. But I need another look at the Q3 documentation. Margot." It was the first time he'd used her given name. She stopped talking. He was looking at her in that way again, the focused way, the only object in a large room way. "You're not going back to work tomorrow," he said. "You're staying here tonight." He said it the way he said everything. Not a question, not a negotiation, and then, quietly, "Please." She had not been expecting the please. She thought about it, About the concrete room and Clifford Haynes' flat eyes and the arm from behind in the parkade. About Biscuit, who could survive one night. Cats being constitutionally opposed to admitting need. About the hallway she was standing in, which smelled like cedar and looked like someone actually lived in it. "Someone needs to feed my cat," she said. He pulled out his phone, made a call, said 3 sentences. Hung up. "Someone will feed your cat," he said. She looked at him for a moment, assessed, filed. "Okay," she said. She slept in a room that had a view of the firs going dark against a lightening sky, and she slept better than she'd expected, which she chose not to examine too closely. In the morning there was coffee, and someone had left fresh clothes in her size outside the door. Not guessed, her size exactly, which should have been alarming and somehow wasn't. She came downstairs. Remy Castle was in the kitchen, which surprised her. She'd expected him to have people who handled kitchens. And he was standing at the stove doing something that smelled like butter and herbs, in a grey shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she stopped in the doorway because the version of him that existed in this room was different from the version that had sat across from her in that glass-walled office, and she needed a moment to reconcile them. He didn't turn around. "You found the Harlow connection," he said. 3 months ago." She came into the kitchen, accepted the coffee that was already poured, already the right color, which meant he'd been paying attention at some point she hadn't noticed. 6 weeks ago. But you knew about it before that. 2 months ago. What were you waiting for?" He was quiet for a moment. "Confirmation." He turned then and looked at her across the kitchen island. "From someone I trusted." She looked at him steadily. "You don't know me. I've read everything you've written in 14 months, every flagged report, every analysis, the Rotterdam notation you made in a footnote, in a reconciliation document that no one was supposed to read." He set down a plate in front of her, and it was eggs with herbs, and looked like it had been made with the same precision he applied to everything. "I know how you think. That's not the same as knowing me." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He looked at her. "I'd like to fix that." She looked down at the eggs. She thought about the footnote in the reconciliation document. A small thing, a careful thing. The kind of notation she made out of habit, because the detail mattered even when no one was looking. She'd never imagined anyone reading it. She thought about being 14 months invisible, and about a man who had read every word she'd written anyway. "You're going to have to handle Clifford Haynes," she said. "It's being handled. And the Harlow account, after breakfast." She picked up the fork. "You run a criminal organization, among other things. That's not a small thing to overlook." "No," he said, "it's not." He sat down across from her, and he looked at her with those steady grey eyes, and he said, "I'm not asking you to overlook it. I'm asking you to stay at the table long enough to make a decision with full information." She ate the eggs. They were very good. "Full information," she said. "Everything you want to know." She considered this. She thought about the Rotterdam transfers and the Harlow account, and the things she'd been following in the Q3 documentation for 6 weeks, that she was almost certain led somewhere Clifford Haynes had been trying very hard to keep hidden. She thought about Biscuit, who had apparently been fed because she'd had a text from an unknown number at 7 a.m. that said only, "Your cat is fine. He's a lot. He's a lot." Someone in Remy Castle's employ had met Biscuit and correctly assessed him. She looked up. "The Q3 files," she said. "I need access to the originals, not the versions that were presented to compliance." Something crossed his face. Relief, maybe, and something warmer beneath it. "I'll have them on your desk by 9. I don't have a desk here." "You will," he said. She held his gaze. He held hers. Outside, the firs were going green-gold in the morning light, and the rain had stopped. Finally, the way Vancouver rain sometimes stops. Abruptly, without apology, as if it had simply decided it had made its point. "Remy," she said. "Yes, I'm very good at my job. I know, and I'll find things you don't want found." I know that too. He didn't look away. I'm counting on it. She put down the fork. She looked at the man across from her. 43 years old, silver at his temples, a face that had been arranged by experience into something permanent, looking at her across a kitchen island in the early morning, with an expression she was finally, carefully, beginning to name. You're going to have to stop calling me Miss Cleary, she said. He almost smiled. She watched it happen at the corner of his mouth, very controlled, very brief, and felt something shift in the careful architecture of her own chest in response. Marga, he said. Just her name, the way he'd said it in the hallway, like it was something he'd been waiting to use. Better, she said, and reached for the coffee, and did not try to hide that she was almost smiling too. Outside, Vancouver was deciding to be beautiful. It did that sometimes, between the rains, went suddenly, fiercely luminous, as if reminding you what it was capable of. The light came through the kitchen windows and fell across the table, where a woman who had spent 14 months learning to be invisible sat across from a man who had spent those same months reading every quiet, careful, brilliant thing she'd put on paper. She had always been good at disappearing. She was starting to think she might be done with that.